arriving in the night as the full moon rises through a strange forest on a lonely road. At the signpost ahead, you have come to your final destination. Welcome to Greenwater Nightz with Sam Ritchie. Now, here's your host, Sam Ritchie.
Hello, my name is Sam Ritchie, and you're listening to Greenwater Nightz, broadcasting deep within the recesses of the Cascade Mountains, where normal and bizarre blend together, and what is taught is fiction, and where myth now becomes reality. Welcome to the world I live in along with my friends, where the Bigfoot and little people are real, and ETs and UFOs abound, where strange lights and orbs appear, and yes, even portals opening up to reveal other worlds. An area not for the faint of heart, but for those seeking the truth, and in the process, making astonishing discoveries about ourselves. So I was asking myself, how did I get to this point of actually hosting my own radio show? And I'm looking back in time and thinking the kind of person I have been over the years. Matter of fact, I'm a very introverted person by nature, and this is probably the last thing in the world that I would even think about doing. However, life seems to be fate. Kind of takes you down certain directions. And so this show basically is about a journey. It's about a journey of where it took me, where it took some of my friends, how we got from one point in our lives to this point. And it's an amazing journey too, because it reveals something about life, about what we've been taught, what we thought was the truth, but find out it's not, or it's a completely different version of it. This show is going to reveal some of the things probably a lot of the things we've learned in the past few years, especially here in the Cascade Mountains, and all the things that were revealed to not only me but my friends. So we're going to have guest interviews from my friends and some other folks on the show in the upcoming episodes. They're going to talk about these experiences. The first part of this, of course, this is the premiere episode of Greenwater Nightz. So my comfort level at this point is probably 10%. But it's going to take a while, since it's far different being a guest on a program versus being the host, and especially when you're actually recounting events and things without benefit of someone asking you questions. But that's okay. And this is going to be a study of how other people can do this too. But I want to spend this first episode, at least for the first hour, talking about my personal situation and how I started and how it led to this point in time. Later on, in hour two, we're going to have a guest interview with Thom Cantrall, a good friend of mine, who's had some amazing experiences with the Bigfoots. We're going to be talking to him and delving into that a little bit. But as far as now, I think back when I was born, well, who can remember that, I guess. But I was growing up, and of course I had a good middle-class family when I was growing up. Everything was very copacetic at the time, back in the late 50s and 60s, I guess, is my earlier childhood. And so I didn't have any real issues, like life problems that some people probably had at the time. And I would say life was a lot more stable at that time versus the turbulence that I personally see. I don't know if others do in life and families nowadays. But I was kind of inculcated in a particular religion, and was taught, you know, I had an expectation of what normal was, basically, and which was a very typical thing. It was basically get an education, grow up, go to college, get a good job, get a nice house, have a nice family, save up for retirement years, and have grandchildren come over and visit. I mean, it was that was kind of the vision I had, at least back then. And so I defined normal as that. But unfortunately, normal was never going to happen, at least in my life. As much as I tried as I got older, going into my late teens and early 20s, I had different ideas. I looked at people around me and says, everybody was accepting the narrative of what they've been taught, but something was wrong. It had that gut feeling or something in the pit of your stomach. It said something's not right around here. Something is not right. But I would never get the opportunity for a long time to really explore what that was. I know in the early, I started raising a family in my 20s, and I would consider myself at the time a very responsible person. Took care of my family, made sure they had they were provided for, basically. And, you know, went through the years, of course, you know, like a lot of families, went through a divorce. I had 3 kids, yes, 3 lovely children. And the divorce came after about 10 years, and then I remarried. And of course that was a roller coaster ride a little bit, because it was a stepkid situation. So you had a situation where, you know, you're split between the new spouse and the kids, and so I had to deal with that for a while. But that feeling I had, that in the pit of my stomach, started cropping up again, and what was buried started coming out after about almost, I'd say almost 35 years later. Something happened to me about 2007. And it was a personal, it just, like, I had, I guess you might call it kind of a nervous breakdown or some kind of realization, and things had to change. And that began the journey that I took over time, because I never expected what was going to happen in the next 10 years or the next 12 years up to now. At the time, I had been married 17 years. I had that realization, and it wasn't that much longer, where my spouse of 17 years at the time, Toby, found out she had cancer. Okay? So, and it was a pretty good sized tumor, and doctors kind of nonchalant about it, says, you got 3 years. Well, it was, you know, denial goes into the picture, and we spent the next 3 years trying to find alternative treatment without having to go the conventional route of chemo and radiation, which led to a trip down to Mexico and a residence down in Texas, and finding out the treatment didn't work. So It required to move to North Carolina and finally go into conventional medication, or doing the chemo and radiation. And sure enough, you know, and then due to insurance problems, had to come all the way back to Washington State, where we were living prior to that. And Toby passed away about 3 months later. Almost exactly 3 years to the day the doctor said she had passed away. So it was probably the most trialsome time of my life as well. But once Toby was gone, I had to have time to reflect on things. I played a lot of music and was buried myself in the basement trying to, in the little mini studio I had, playing music with the headphones on, singing a lot of my favorite songs, some of the ones I've written, because I always entertained a music career, never quite got to that point. And I was in the city, and I had to get out of there. So I had to take some trips. I found a place out towards the edge of the Cascade Mountains, or the foothills, basically, a town called Enumclaw, that I had prior to gone to, basically, to telecommute for the job that I had, which I'm a technical person, I'm an IT person, very logical, very good at my trade. Had done this for many years, very successfully. And so on my journeys out there, I took it a little bit further. I said, I don't need to go deep in the foothills. And around 2007 or 2008, well, actually I did this before Toby passed, I found this place called Greenwater. Greenwater's not a very large place. It's more of a tourist village more than anything else. And but it was very quaint. And I'd go to the little local coffee shop initially. Then I'd go down to the beach area of the White River. I'd spend about 2 or 3 hours, and you know, would actually sit in the little tavern with my laptop and actually do some work there before heading back to the city. Well, I was finding myself doing that twice a week. So the draw out there was something was drawing me out to the mountains. And then the things cropping up about trying to figure things out, that feeling of change, or the feeling of I had to discover something, that the need to know there was some kind of truth embedded in the mountains. Didn't realize at the time, but it became more of a, not an obsession, but almost like a mission. I needed to get out in the mountains more often. So about 2012, I located a small RV that just so happened to be sitting in the local tavern parking lot, priced just right, and paid for it. Went inside to the tavern and I said, I need to find a place to put this. Don't necessarily want to drive back to the city. So I went ahead and they had a lot that I could park it in, and I said, great, perfect. So here I had an older used camper that was paid for, and a pretty reasonable lot fee to park it. So then I was spending a whole lot of time out there. So that's when the fun began. I went down to the general store one day. I don't know if it was about 2012, 2013 or whatever. But I was walking in there, and there was a lady at the counter, and I had a glass counter at the time, and I think it still does. And I looked down and saw footprints. I saw what looked like ceramic footprints, but they weren't human size. They were much larger. I had to ask, what is this?
And he said, so the lady said, they're castings. They're castings of Bigfoot. And I'm going like, really? They're real? Now, my exposure to that prior to this was, I'm an open-minded person. But nothing happened to me in that way to even, I didn't have any experiences yet. And I remember back in the 70s, something about the early film called the Patterson-Gimlin film, and it was on the media a little bit in the late 60s, early 70s. But also had some of the media press talking about fake footprints that people were making and stuff like that, people wearing costumes that, basically hoaxing everything about Bigfoot. So that's all the opinion I had at the time. And a little bit later on, that movie came out called Harry and the Hendersons, and I actually enjoyed that movie. And it says a great bit of fiction, I thought to myself, but I actually enjoyed it, So Barb, the lady, her name is Barb Shoup. So I was very curious about this. So from that day forward, I had a chance to talk to her on a number of occasions, and she revealed her story. How she got involved in this. She actually had a sighting, and she saw some elk running. I'm not going to go through it very deeply because I plan to have Barb on as a guest, because she was very instrumental in my own awareness of what's going on out here. So she kind of was the doorway into it as a friend. But she spotted the elk running, she saw something chasing it. She's saying to herself, what's a mountain ape doing out here in the Northwest? First reaction. And she's watching this so-called mountain ape run, and all of a sudden starts to run past a tree, and nothing comes out on the other side. It's just like zip and then disappears. So I'm astonished by this experience. And it led into a little bit later, we decided I hadn't found time to really help out. Would go with her and actually join her out in some of her expeditions out into the woods, and I did that along with her dog at the time, Gabby. And however, I didn't have my own personal experiences yet, but it's kind of strange because it wasn't that much longer where I started hearing sounds. I'd be in my RV, which is on the outskirts of the tavern parking lot, and I would start hearing, it would start out like what I thought were owl sounds, which normally you hear like the barred owl sounds. And you might look that up to figure out what that sounds like. However, it would be accompanied by actual howls. The problem is, I know owls are not, I know the size of those owls are, and some of them can produce pretty good screeching, I suppose. But this was so deep and so resonating. I mean, it was so loud sometimes, it would just like vibrate through you. And it just could not be an owl or a bird or any animal that I'd known of. So I'd start hearing it not only deep in the woods, just not far deep, not that far deep into the woods, but in other places as well. I finally had a chance, of course, to purchase some property on the other side of Greenwater, which is closer to the White River. And it was just a small little cabin, and I was able to pull the RV over there about 2013. And that's when I started hearing the sounds coming from the other side of the river. deep howls. These weren't close-up sounds. These were sounds coming from way on the other side. So it kind of led into more, what's going on here? I had my suspicions that I was actually listening to the Bigfoots. One day, I built a fire pit down in next to the RV, and I started a fire there, and had to go inside the RV for a minute or so. So I started coming back out, and all of a sudden I saw something rustling and running, like faster than you could ever possibly imagine. And it was screaming, and it was heading in the woods nearby. And it was a small being. Turned out it was a juvenile Bigfoot. It was messing by the fire and just got panicked when I walked out the door. Just took off. I guess the curiosity about the fire or something. I said, oh man. I cannot believe this. Well, that led into another experience by the tavern, where, I think it was a little bit prior to that when I still had, I think I was taking the RV back and forth between the property. I still had rented the spot in the parking lot. And I'd walked out behind the outbuildings there, and it was completely dark. I was hearing a singular, what I thought was an owl sound. So I made the mistake of taking a small flashlight and shining it up in the tree, and all of a sudden there was this massive sounds of like monkey chatter, like total panic from the light shining up there, and I was mortified. So I had to kind of back out from there. I wasn't about to turn my back on that in the darkness and let something jump on me. I didn't know. So I just slowly backed up with the light shining out so I wouldn't have anything jump on me. And some other people were standing around, some other guys I guess were standing around by the tavern. They heard all this, so they said, well, we were chasing the sound basically, and these sounds were moving up in the trees all the way across to the RV and all the way back around. One of them had a more powerful flashlight. I said, you want to point that up? He said, I think it's up this tree, whatever it is. So when he took the flashlight and pointed it up there, first thing I saw was a big grayish black ball, a large being, and all of a sudden it was lunging from one tree to the other. And I caught sight of that before he pulled the flashlight away. And then the sounds kept going down the way, down toward the other street. They continued on the chase down through it, and I said, no, I'm done tonight. So it was a great experience, and that told me right there what was real. I mean, I was starting to really understand that, man, the Bigfoots are actually real. But that wouldn't be the end of it. That was only the start. So, in time, we, Barb Shoop, had organized what they call the Barb and Gabby Campout Group. And this was about the time of 2014, I suppose. And I wanted to join them on the camp out in September of that time. So we're going to get into that story a little bit. I'm just checking the time to see where we're at. It goes by quickly when you actually start talking about events. But briefly, we went up the trail of one of the places that's not far from her cabin. And she wanted to show the group that was camping with us a stick break that could not possibly have been made by nature. And as she was taking that, showing that, she had her iPod actually pointed at that end beyond that. And all of a sudden, I hear her say, and of course I was caught on, and several others were caught on the camera too. She says, did you see that? Something big and black jumped down, took off. And I kind of heard something, but I didn't see what was running or anything like that. But she did have her iPod pointed at that. So later on that evening, when we had time to relax at the camp, Barb sat down and she had a Microsoft Surface, I believe, computer. So she transferred the video over to that so it would be a little bit bigger screen to see. And all I see is, oh my God, can't believe it. And we're all kind of like, what's going on? So we go over there by her, where she's sitting there, and she says, oh my God, this is only the stuff of science fiction. So as we're huddled around and looking, we're watching this video of something jumping down off a branch and taking off. However, what was jumping down was not black. It was translucent. It was almost like you're watching the movie The Predator, when the translucent beam jumped down from the tree and took off. This had the same, it was translucent, you could see through it, there was greenery behind it. We were astonished by that. We were not satisfied with looking on the surface, so we went up on the top of the hill where Barb's father had the RV, and they had a really super large big screen TV. So we hooked the computer up to that, sat there in amazement, watching this thing back and forth, and that led into a new journey. And when I get back from the break, I'm actually going to talk about what actually happened the very next day to myself. And it changed my life forever. So, this is Greenwater Nightz. I'm your host, Sam Ritchie. When we return, we'll get into that experience. Welcome back. I'm your host, Sam Ritchie, and this is Greenwater Nightz. In the prior segment, I was referring to an experience that would be very life-changing. Of course, I just alluded to the fact that we were huddled around looking at what appeared to be a translucent being or a cloaking creature that jumped down off the branch. And it was pretty amazing. However, the very next day, I was interested in going back up that trail, but I wanted to go by myself. So the whole point of doing that, though, was I wanted an experience. I wanted a personal experience with Bigfoot. I'm not sure exactly what I was expecting at the time. Perhaps to have the big guy come up to me and shake his hand. And so what I decided not to do was to bring up equipment, like recording equipment, like a camera or recorder or anything like that. Because I had heard that at the time, they weren't very friendly towards those things. And if you did bring all the equipment, you're kind of killing your opportunity to have an experience. So, and I was really intrigued with the idea of having an experience that I could live with for the rest of my life. So that's why I made the decision to leave everything behind. So the very next day, I believe it was mid-afternoon, I headed back up the trail where the day prior that other being was that translucent being was jumped down off the trail. So I had a feeling that they might still be there, or something was still up there. I wasn't really as concerned about my own safety. I just had a feeling that I needed to go up there. So as I made my way up the trail, I was noticing that the wind started kicking up. And up to that point, there was no wind per se. But the closer I got to this little clearing, just off the side where we saw the other being, the wind was really kicking up, and something was going on with myself as well, because as I was walking through that little field area, I was feeling very euphoric. I was feeling very happy. Not quite sure why. The energy was just amazing. It was just like the wind was almost like energy. And it was energizing my attitude, and it was energizing myself. And I got almost kind of whimsical a little bit, because as I was walking to the trail, I would go, "Hello, Bigfoots. Hello, little people. Hello, this. Hello, that. Hello, trees." And I was just being very friendly and welcoming to everything in the woods, everything around me. So I made my way through the trail to the end, and it's not a very big field area. So I turned around, and as I was walking back, I had noticed something, because the sun was actually shining through the trees. And what I came across was, I saw this really bright, what I thought was a reflection, like a very high intensity orange light reflection. And I'm thinking, something, now water will do the same thing. If something's wet, you get kind of a reflection from that. So as I got closer, I was expecting to see something like that reflecting off the ground. However, as I got closer, I noticed something very, very strange. The lights that I was seeing was not some reflection off the ground. The lights were actually suspended above the ground. Imagine yourself 2 or 3 feet up off the ground. Lights, glowing lights, like tubes of light, like you normally think of the lightsaber from Star Wars, for instance. Orange, very orange, reddish, brilliant, shining, pulsating light. And it had a shape, too. There were actually 4 distinct lights. Each of the lights formed like a letter Z with very long ends, with a short end in a long area. And so you had 4 of these, but they were shaped like a rectangular box. You can't, seeing something like that, I'm walking up to it, I'm seeing this for myself. It's real. It's in the midday. I couldn't keep my eyes off of it, and I'm walking up close to this thing, and I'm about 15 feet away. I'm thinking to myself, I'm still got that whimsical, euphoric feeling going, well, you don't see that every day, do you? And so, however, I wasn't going to get any closer because, I don't know what to expect, you see. So anyway, I very cautiously at that point kept looking at it. I mean, I couldn't help but stare at this thing, load and above the trail. And I was asking, I wish I had the camera now, but that's okay. So I did take my attention away from that. I looked, so I don't know why I turned my attention away from it. But when I looked away and turned back, I saw the next amazing thing. An amazing beach ball size orb that looked like a gigantic orange soap bubble that was translucent. And it also had glowing electrical stuff around it. and around it. And it started floating towards the light beams. I'm like staring at this thing and going, oh my. And this thing slowly moves over and it goes to the one end of the rectangular light beams and docks itself right in the end of it. And as it does that, it pulsates. But as it's pulsating, it begins to fade. Pulsating, 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 until finally it's gone. And this is the middle of the day. This wasn't on a camera or anything like that. So I went back down the trail and thinking, well, I was expecting a personal experience that would be life-changing, but it wasn't what I expected. It was something that proved something. It proved that there are intelligences beyond what humans are. So it basically, immediately, that day broke down a door, and all things are possible at that point. And part of me became angry. The part of me that pit of the feeling in the pit of the stomach that something wasn't right all those years finally came to a head with proof that there is something different out there than what we've been taught. And the anger was all the stories and the narrative we've been fed our entire lives was now up for grabs as something different. So you had to quit, and so I left with an attitude, now I have to question everything I've ever been taught my entire life. And that was, and it stayed with me. That experience stayed with me, day in and day out afterwards. It also built up a desire inside me to discover the truth. And not to quote one famous series, but when you think about one particular program where it talked about the truth, well, it's out there somewhere. And I think it was time to go find it. So that was the really start of a significant turning point in my journey. That started leading me down other roads. So that was an amazing experience for me. And unfortunately, I did keep it to myself for a long time. And didn't feel like, I think I told a couple of people and they kind of like, oh yeah, that's fine. So, but it was precious to me. And I also knew that there must have been a connection with the Bigfoots as well to what I saw. So time goes on by, and as time progresses, we start having more experiences. I mean, for me personally, I would have to spend probably several hours on a show to talk about every experience I've had in the last 5-6 years. However, I just have enough time to talk about some of the highlights. And it was, a lot of it took place in the same year. This was, I remember the date of seeing the light beings that I call a portal, or the portal in the orb, and it was September 12th of 2014. The day after, of course, Barb had her famous cloaking Bigfoot video that ended up on the internet on YouTube, and a countless number of people actually seeing that, and several analysis videos were made. But I went back up the trail, and there was obviously something going on in that small area. And so I made my way back up there in October, and it was a sunny day that day as well. The sun came out, and there's a particular ridge over on the right. Just I have it all mapped out in my mind. And I'm looking up on this ridge, and I'm seeing the shadows. Of course, you can still see the under the trees, and you see it's a little bit darker, but you can still see the detail of the ground and the branches and things like that. But then all of a sudden, I start to look in between these two trees, and I can't see through it. I said, this is strange, very strange. I could see the intensity of the shadows. It says that this shadow cannot be in that intense in the sunlight. But the other strange characteristic of that darkness was it was shimmering, or it had that kind of, best thing I can describe is when you look at a hot pavement pavement on a road during a hot day, and you're looking at it just right, and you just start seeing the mirage of the pavement. Well, this is the shimmering, the mirage-y look I saw on that darkness. So I had a cell phone camera at the time, and I made an assumption. Something told me something was inside that darkness that I couldn't see with my own two eyes at the time. So I waved at it, and then I took a picture with the cell phone. 15 seconds later, I wanted to get a little bit closer to it to try to see if I could see through it, and didn't have really much success with that. So I took another picture. Well, lo and behold, a little bit later, kind of reminds me of Barb's experience when she downloaded something on the computer and had her aha moment there. I loaded my cell phone pictures on the computer, was able to use some lighting enhancement tools. As I lighted up the darkness that was between the two trees, I was astonished. What was there was a full-size Bigfoot. And in the first picture, I could see his face, I could see his brow, I could see he was holding onto a branch with his left hand, with his right hand was extended out and waving back to me. I was floored. When I got to the second picture, it changed. The head was now turned to the side. The right hand that was actually waving at me was now pointing toward me. And the head being turned to the side told me, hey, he's talking to another Bigfoot. And he's pointing me out, says, hey, this person can see us. That's how I interpreted that. And it was important to me because it was an interaction. Even though I couldn't actually see it with my own eyes, the pictures proved from the other side of what I call a veil of blackness that they were interacting with me. They didn't know that I could see them directly. I just made that assumption. So I think they were kind of tickled because in the first picture you actually see the Bigfoot's kind of smiling, kind of smirking a little bit. I thought that was so cool. So those things I cherish to this day. And even though it was that far back. So, and it led to other experiences too. I mean, I want to recount one in particular, same area, and this area is so special. I don't know if it's like a intergalactic or interdimensional gateway or airport where people come and go or beings come and go, but it seems to be the case. One day I was feeling kind of goofy, so I got up in that field area, and there was a couple of downed trees, but they were kind of, they were small enough where you could jump on them and hang on to something else and kind of like do the kind of jump up and down on it. It had some spring action to it. So I decided to act a little ape-ish and act like an ape a little bit, jumping up and down on the thing. Nobody else was around, and I'm assuming that if someone saw me that they would have to call the medics or something to see what was wrong with me. But I was just feeling kind of goofy, feeling kind of good, and acting up. I was taking branches from the tree and was hanging up, like some of the branches. I was just manipulating branches around a particular tree. And then I did that for about 5 minutes, and I'm telling myself, what are you doing? Get off this branch before someone sees you doing this stuff. So I get off and I walk down the trail, and I'm just leaving the field area. And as I get near the end of it, and to get down on the trail to go back down to the road, all of a sudden I hear this female voice, and I'm going to do a very bad imitation of it, but it went, and then it was followed by kind of a owl sound, 2 of them. Well, my first thought was, I thought that was Barb Shoop. The problem was the voice was a perfect replication of her voice, but it was making this strange sound. And I'm thinking, what's she doing out in the woods? Is she playing a game? I'd never known her to actually play games like that with me. So I'm thinking something's going on. So I head back down the trail, and then I just so happen to see, I get down to a place where Barb's cabin's at. And I see her car parked there, so I go and knock on the door, and Barb comes to the door. I'm saying, I thought you were up on the trail. And I described the experience to her. That was not done by an animal. That was not done by a bird. It was a human-like voice. And the fact that it did that and followed it up with 2 distinct barred owl sounds came across to me with this idea. That was me doing that. So whatever it was, I guess it might have been a female Sasquatch, for instance, or a young one. It was basically conveying the message by doing that. It says, first of all, I'm going to make this first sound so you know it's not an owl or a bird or any other kind of animal. It's a Bigfoot. And then followed up by 2 barred owl sounds told me that they're the ones that make those sounds sometimes. Okay? Especially the really loud ones. I also took it as, why did they do that in the first place? It was almost like a high five, like someone was watching me jump up and down on that branch and were getting a kick out of it. And they really wanted to let me know that they really enjoyed it. So that tickled me. I had such a great time with that. So that is just only a couple of the experiences that I had ever since then. And I've had numerous experiences where in the middle of the night I'd get out of my tent thinking there's safety in numbers, and my tent's huddled around the fire pit even though it was put out. So now I had a nature call and had to step outside for a second. I didn't want to walk all the way to the other side of camp in the dark, lonely utility tent to use the facilities. I figured it'd be okay to come out here. The minute I come out there, all of a sudden, something jumps down and runs around the fire pit quicker than any dog could. And I'm thinking it was Barb's dog, Gabby. And I go, Gabby, what are you doing? And all of a sudden it made this strange sound. That was a bad imitation too. However, I'm thinking, and then it took off, and I'm thinking, oh, whatever. I guess if I realized it was really a young Bigfoot jumping down and running around the pit, it would have frightened me. I actually had a tape recorder on that actually caught that. And I had posted on some YouTube videos in the past. And what was amazing was, while I was paying attention to the fire pit on the recorder, I heard this very deep breathing sound from behind me. And it was the adult that was monitoring the situation, breathing very heavily right behind me. So I guess if I realized all this was really happening, I would have passed out. So, but there's only one other with the rest of this hour, before we bring our guest on, Thom Cantrall, one other experience in particular I had was in one of our campouts. We had a couple that was, and their young daughter was camping out, and they were kind of in between situations, not necessarily homeless, but they were having an extended vacation camping in the woods. And so he, his name was John. So he had an experience where he kept seeing this, I saw this black bear out here. Well, we described what it was, and then all of a sudden he come back, no, I guess it wasn't a black bear, it was a Bigfoot. So he started describing these interactions he started having as I stopped by their campsite every so often. I got to know them a little bit, and his girlfriend, Kathy. Well, that went on for a little bit, and then I saw them even after the camp out and checked on them every so often. And then one day, Kathy comes barreling into Greenwater and says, Sam, you got to come out here. You got to see what John's doing. And so what's he doing? No, I can't tell you. You got to come out here. So I go out there, and he said, come out in the evening. So I got up about 7, and of course at that time of the year it was getting dark already. And I see John sitting with his head down by the fire, and all of a sudden I start hearing for 15 solid seconds all the howling, all the Bigfoot's howling and everything for 15 seconds, and then it just stops suddenly. John raises his head and said, I asked him to do that. And he says, I said to him, is this what you want to show me? I said, oh, and then Kathy interjects, says, no, John's going to show you something out here. So I followed John out behind the vehicles off the road. We're looking up on a clear sky. We see the stars up above. He says, he's looking around, and he points out a star, not a really bright one, but just somewhat dim or whatever, but I was able to triangulate by him pointing it out to me. He said, now pay attention to that star up there, okay? So as he's pointing with his finger, I'm watching the star up there. So he takes his finger, he closes his eyes and concentrates, and starts to move his finger slowly towards the left. And lo and behold, as I'm looking up at that star, it starts to move with his finger. And all of a sudden he takes his finger and does a U motion, down and back up, like a letter U. The light in the sky does the same thing. And he takes his finger and whips out to the left, and it all of a sudden it goes the same speed and takes off. I'm looking up at the sky, seeing this for myself, and thinking, and I said to him, I can't believe what I'm seeing. I would gladly pay you a couple $100 just to see this experience. Then the next thought I had was, who are you? Who are your parents? He says, well, I was given up in adoption. Last thing I remember, my mom gave me up. He says, well, why did she do that? She didn't like the way I was moving pencils from across the table. This man had some kind of abilities. We often think about, some of the superheroes that are on some of the movies lately. This guy had some kind of ability, telekinesis, where he could actually manipulate things from that distance. That's pretty awesome. It's also pretty scary sometimes, because you wonder what's going on. I mean, how did he get these abilities? Was he in fact fully human? I'll never know. Him and the girlfriend took off, and he kind of disappeared down in Texas, I believe. But it was awfully. I already had that one life-changing experience with the portal, but now I see this. I'm thinking 2 life-changing experiences. One related to something, and then both of them seem to be ET related, in addition to the Bigfoot. And then that started a whole other chain of events of me actually seeing 2 UFO sightings And things had never stopped from there. There was more experiences even in the past year. But our time is about up before the second hour. I'm going to have to take the time sometimes, and when I relate these other experiences, I'll actually have another friend of mine who's been a good friend for the last 3 years, and we've hung out and had shared these same experiences. So I'll relate those on another episode. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude this particular segment. And in the next hour, we're going to go ahead and have our interview with Thom Cantrall. So this is Greenwater Nightz. I'm your host, Sam Ritchie. We're going to have a station break. And when we come back, we'll go ahead and resume the interview. Welcome back. This is Greenwater Nightz. I'm your host, Sam Ritchie, and we're here with our guest, Thom Cantrall, who's going to be speaking with us for the next hour. Now, Thom Cantrall is a native of Northern California, where he graduated from Sonoma Valley High School in 1961. He's a 9-year Navy veteran, and he attended the University of Washington. Years of forestry and logging in the Pacific Northwest led to some really personal experiences with the Sasquatch, which developed into a lifelong interest in and pursuit of the creatures. So welcome, Thom.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We've known each other for a little while now, and it was about 4 years.
Has to be that long, doesn't it?
It seems like it. And we have some common friends like Barb Shoup and Sandy Nelson, who kind of led to all that. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about your personal experience. I know you've been doing the logging, and the thing is that people that tend to get away from the city and actually go out, after a while, there's usually some strange activity or things that they experience. Can you tell us your first inkling of your experiences with the Sasquatch, or something that really stood out before you really had major contact with them?
Yes, and that started back in the early 1970s when I was working as a forester, and I would do consulting work for timber companies, especially bridge design in this state, in order to build a road that crosses a stream used by anadromous fish. That's those that go to the ocean and come back into freshwater to spawn. You have to have a permit from the state to build a bridge. That requires a rather extensive report on the conditions that of the land and the stream at that point. So I would be hired to go in and do that. Sometimes it was a walk of 4, 5, 6, 7 miles back into virgin timber. And I learned very early on that the last thing you want to do in that situation is to hike back out, do your write-up, and find out that you've forgotten one measurement. So I learned to sit on the bank and do a rough drawing to make sure I had all of my measurements. I had all the stream type, the water flow, everything was consistent before I left. And it was at this time that I would be sitting there working quietly several miles off the road and hear a whistle. for years I thought that was just a bird that I hadn't classified. And I finally figured out, every time I heard that whistle, when I looked up, there'd be this set of eyeballs peeking around a tree at me.
It wasn't necessarily a bird that was following you around. The bird would have been too big for the set of eyeballs that you were looking at.
Absolutely. It wasn't until 2010, and I was at the Oregon Sasquatch Symposium in Eugene, Oregon, and Mr. Ron Moorhead was giving his presentation on the Sierra Sounds, and that whistle was in it.
Oh, as part of the language?
As part of the language, yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And since then I've come to the realization that that's just one of them is watching me. And he's telling the others around, hey, I've got the big guy over here. And yeah, that's all it was. They were just communicating back and forth. He was letting others know that he was watching me. And it kind of opened up all new doors for me. But that was my first experience, was that and an eyeball around, generally not even two eyeballs, just one, peeking around a tree at me.
So how long did this go on before the next phase of your contact?
Not long. The next phase, just those sightings became more prevalent and longer, and then probably a year or so later, I had my first real face-to-face experience with them when I happened to, on a pair that were feeding in a small blowdown area. I was hiking out and saw the open area ahead of me in the timber and decided to check it out, because usually that means a pond. This land is pretty low. It's on the west end of the Olympic Peninsula, and it gets a lot of rain there, 200 plus inches of rain a year. And so you never know what's going to be in a clearing like that. So I sneaked up on it quietly, and here's two of them picking oyster mushrooms off the down logs.
So you actually saw two full-bodied Sasquatch?
Right.
Were they adolescents or?
No, they were adults.
They were full-blown adults.
It was a male and a female.
The female probably was a bit smaller, but
a bit smaller, yeah.
What would you estimate the male?
I would say he was 8 feet. She was probably 7.5 feet tall, and they were about 50 yards from me when I first saw them. So I just hunkered down behind a tree and where I could keep an eye on them, play the reverse game, peek around the tree at them for a while, and watch them. And it was probably 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then they fed closer, and probably up to about 35 to 40 yards is as close as they got. But in wide open, there was nothing between us. Nothing disturbed us at all. And then the wind changed, and I felt a breath of wind on the back of my neck, and I knew I was busted then. But in watching them, first one would stand up and look all around, make sure that there's nothing watching them, and then that one would go back to eating, and the other one would stand up and keep watch. And like I say, as they fed along, they moved a bit closer to me. But then that wind hit, and 4 eyeballs locked onto me immediately.
Oh, they could actually probably pick up the scent of the human
immediately.
scent.
As soon as that wind hit the back of my neck and was from me to them, they had me made. And so rather than scare them, frighten them, I just stood up and stepped out so they could see who I was and what I was, And she then, the female, bent over and picked up a baby. She had him sitting on the ground, and then I couldn't see him because the trees were too high. The down tree blowdowns were too high off the ground. And he kind of stepped aside and let her by him, and she just walked back into the trees, the standing trees. And as he turned to follow her, I said to him out loud, I says, "Thank you for showing me your family." And he turned back and looked at me, and just like a nod of the head, just an acknowledgement. And I've always felt that was a real acknowledgement.
Not necessarily like a human smile or anything, just a nod. Just say,
nod.
I acknowledge. Okay, very good. So
yeah, and then he turned and followed her back into the timber. and that was beyond fantastic. And then it just escalated from there over the years. The Olympic Peninsula is such a prime area for Sasquatch. There's a good sized clan on both the north end and the south end of the peninsula, and a lot of individuals, because there's a lot of feed there and a lot of cover for them. It's a wonderful place. I wish I could return more, but it's the next encounter I had, same general area, probably within 5 miles of where this happened. I was hiking in to do a bridge site survey, came around the end of a log, a big blowdown, and a root wad sticking up, walked around the end of it, and here's a full-grown male standing there eating huckleberries. And he was at a range of about 10 feet from me. And he looked at me, and his eyes got about as big around as saucers.
He probably was just as surprised as maybe.
Yeah,
we get surprised with them.
We surprised one another.
Yeah.
And I just looked at him. I was, well, hi, big guy. How are you today? You know. And he kind of did a double take on me, and then turned and just did the patty walk, you know, and walked away. And that one was significant in that, you know, I was able to see tracks being made. Okay, it was very muddy. The reason I was there that day was because the water had finally gone down in the Dickey River enough so that the land was drained so that I could get in. So it was very, very wet.
So you not only saw tracks, you actually saw the tracks being made.
I saw
that was amazing.
I saw the perfect tracks when they're still standing in them.
Nice. Now, did you take the opportunity to do any castings at that point?
I didn't have
any materials at the
cast
time.
with.
Yep.
But what I did do was I decided to take off my own boots and walk where he had walked so I could get a real comparison. And because for once, I didn't have to worry how many days ago were his made, so how much drier or wetter is the soil today than it was when he made his tracks. I mean, it was right there. I knew when he made his tracks. So I took my boots off and socks and set them aside and walked. And the first thing I did, of course, being an engineer, I had to measure everything. Mm-hmm. And as an engineer, my pace is measured. I could walk a half mile to a mile and keep time with my pace and not have to carry a chain or a rule to know how far I'd come. I've run property lines doing that. And my pace is exactly 60 inches, 30 inches per step.
So that's what they call the stride?
In engineering terms, a step is 1 foot from left to right, and a pace is left, right, left.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay, and so it's actually 2 steps. So and I made it when I tested it in college. It's a practice you go through to learn how to do this, and it was a couple inches off. So I learned to adjust my pace so that it was exactly 60 inches to the pace. So that made each step 30 inches. I measured them, were 52 inches. Okay, I'm 6'4", and I have a 60-inch pace. He has a 104-inch pace, almost 90.
Almost double. Okay, so based on a ratio of that, you know, between what you were talking about, you can pretty much assume that they would have been twice as tall.
I knew pretty much exactly how tall he was because of the trees there. He brushed the branches he was walking, so I could measure that. And I was curious about how the difference in depth that we sunk in. So I did a measurement of our footprints individually to figure the square inches of foot on the ground. Mm-hmm. And I had 30, if I remember right, it's been a long time, 34 to 35 inches per square inches a foot on the ground. Okay, he had like 84 square inches of foot on the ground.
So it's not only the length of the foot, it's also the width and everything.
The width of it, yeah.
Kind of the square footage of it.
Right.
Coverage, yeah.
The anatomical constant for primates taught in any Anatomy 101 class is 6.5 to 1. Okay. The individual, the center of the bell curve, that doesn't mean that everybody with a 12-inch footprint is going to be, exactly 6.5 times that in height. That means that's the center of the bell curve, and you'll have standard deviations to both sides of that. But by doing that, now where was I going with all this?
Probably about the size, being able to establish the size of it.
By being able to establish the height, profession-wise, and then with the information for the square inches of foot, and knowing my weight, I could extrapolate his weight, and we were putting pretty much the same pounds per square inch on the ground. And I still use that figure today. He was putting 7.5 pounds per square inch on the ground when his foot was flat on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When he stepped, of course they have the mid-tarsal brake. When he leaned forward and stepping, that brake comes into play, and now all of his weight is on the front half of his foot. So the pressure doubles.
Right.
Okay, so if you want to ever tell if it's a Sasquatch track or a human track, look at that alone. Shape, length, width, all out the window. If the back half is deeper than the front half, it's a fake. Okay.
And to kind of explain for those that are listening to the show about a mid-tarsal brake, we know in the Bigfoot community we're familiar with that, but try to expound on what that exactly means of it.
Primates, non-human primates at any rate, have a break across their foot. The bones are in place for us, but it's not doesn't work in us. But all other primates do have that mid-tarsal break. It's actually a joint in the middle of the foot. We have an arch. They don't. Their feet are flat, and it has a joint in the middle. That's a very important concept to remember. When we walk, we pole vault over our knees. Mm-hmm. We land with a very heavy heel strike. So most of our weight is concentrated on that heel when it strikes. That's why the heel will always be deeper in a human print than it is in a Sasquatch print, because their foot lands flat, then the mid-tarsal brake breaks and puts the extra weight on the front half as they step. Consequently, in our tracks, the back half of the track is going to be the deepest, and their tracks, the front half is going to be the deepest.
Right. They're more of the weight on
Mm-hmm.
that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And don't you think that because they're able to bend that joint in the middle, it might have a lot to do with the fact that if they get in trees and situations, the foot can actually wrap around a little bit better?
I think that's exactly what it is. It's and because they do use trees at will.
You're saying the primates do that? The primates do that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Other primates, yes.
Right. So we're the ones left behind a little bit in this game.
We're the oddballs. We're the odd man out in that game, yes. Totally.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Well, I know we went down this road a little bit. I think we were talking about your experiences, your first initial experiences with the Sasquatch. And honestly, just being able to see them full body like that is a very unique opportunity.
It really is.
Don't.
I mean, you have to remember, this was almost 20 years into my investigation in the phenomenon. And it took that long before I had a full body exposure.
But so from the time you started seeing eyes following you,
Mm-hmm.
to this experience of seeing them on the female and the male on the beach.
Mm-hmm. No, that was a short period of time. From the time I started investigating until the time I saw eyes was 13 years, 14 years.
Oh, so you had this interest early on.
Oh, yes. The interest started 61 years ago.
So you think it's about time like the Patterson-Gimlin film?
Prior to that, 1958 with the Jerry Crew incident in Northern California.
Oh.
That incident made the newspapers. It happened on 25th of August, 1958. It was written up by Andrew Genzoli of the Humboldt Times newspaper in Eureka, California, and was picked up by the wire services. And I saw it on October 6th, 1958. And it lit a fire in me that's still burning today, 61 years later.
So it tricked you. Yeah. I mean, when I say tricked you, I mean it tricked your trigger, or something triggered inside of you that became like, I don't want to call it an obsession, but it was just something like, I need to find out how, because you might have figured out maybe it might impact your life someday, or...
We were talking about the difference between intrigue and an obsession just last night.
Oh, really?
And no, it's not an obsession, but it's a deep, abiding interest.
And yet other people, they'll come across stories like this, or they'll come across this information and, oh, that's interesting. And then they'll walk away.
They didn't have my father.
Oh, so there were some defining moments with your father.
Oh, yeah. He could trip my trigger on curiosity more than anybody in the world. And that's what he did.
So you were the kind of person that wasn't satisfied with the usual explanations for things, or the ones the government gave you or anybody else,
Exactly. The official explanation has never sat well with me. And we had people even at that time, oh, that's a deranged Indian who lives, he gets around a lot.
Well, I kind of share that passion too, with my own personal experiences, with, I was a malcontent, just probably like you were in the beginning, so. Go ahead.
Then I spent, I was only 15 at the time that happened. Then finished high school, spent 9 years in the Navy, and there wasn't much chance to do any physical research when you're 300 feet below the surface in the North Atlantic somewhere.
Oh, no.
But I did read everything I could get my hands on.
Right.
I read every one of Dr. Ivan Sanderson's books, and he's written 13 of them. Mm-hmm. All on, some of them worldwide acclaimed. The man had, 5 or 6 doctorates. He was just an international authority on mammals. And he investigated the Crew report and wrote magazine articles for True Magazine and Argosy Magazine. And this was back in the days when magazines were how we got our information.
We didn't have the internet.
We didn't have the internet.
Nothing.
Right.
Yes, I kind of share the time frame with you a little bit back there.
Yeah, that was when we looked forward to the arrival of the Saturday Evening Post and Life magazine.
Right.
And they were a major part of our life. That's how information was shared.
So did you have any connection with? We're going to get into this in the latter part of this interview after the break. But did when the Patterson-Gimlin film came out, I guess it was 1967, and it did make a splash in the media a little bit at the time, because I even have inklings of remembering that as a kid. Mm-hmm. I was still a teenager, I was a preteen, and I was just wondering if you had any reaction to that at the time.
Actually, I didn't see it, didn't know of it till in the 70s, because when it happened, October of 1967, I was at sea.
Okay.
And
so you had limited exposure to media and things.
We had no exposure to media. I was in a submarine. We were under the surface, and we got a little bit of news in, but it had to be, the major headlines is all we ever saw.
Oh, I see.
And,
okay.
And no communication back at all.
So you served in the Navy?
Yeah.
So how long were you?
From August 1961 to April 1970.
Oh, okay. So you about 3 years past that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you at that point you started getting exposed to some of the stuff.
Yes, something I was reading referred to it, so I had to find out what they were talking about, and I knew immediately what it was. Now, over the past years, I've, to my total satisfaction, have proven the veracity of it. It absolutely cannot be anything else other than what is described, and that testimony comes from the best experts in the world on costume making, from the man who taught the school on monster creation, Mr. Bill Munns. Mm-hmm. He did the creatures for Creature of the Black Lagoon. He ran the school, taught people how to do Hollywood monster making.
Right.
John Chambers won the Academy Award in 1968 for Planet of the Apes. Said that if that was a fake, it was the best fake ever perpetrated because we didn't have the materials that would do what that did in that film.
Oh yeah, I was actually a fan of that film.
Yeah, and he said in our film, in Planet of the Apes, it took 4 hours to put that suit together. Mm-hmm. Every day.
Oh yeah, for each person.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and then look at the testimony of the person who claims he was in the suit. Just read his testimony on it. I drove from my home in Yakima down to California to Bluff Creek, and we got out and I put the suit on and I walked across the gravel bar and Roger filmed me and I took the suit off and got back in my car and went home.
What's the incentive to do that? That's the first thing I would ask.
That's my first question. If you were going to do a fake, you lived in Yakima, Washington with a Cascade Mountain Range in your back door, the highest concentration of Sasquatch in the world, why would you drive 700 miles to do a fake?
Right, and unfortunately some of that stuff made it in the media in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference with people with critical thinking. They actually will take the time to look at all the evidence or at the time. And someone like myself that just didn't have time to be, if you were just a passerby, like I was as a teenager, I came across this information, but the only thing presented to me about it was fake. There was somebody faking the footprints, walking around with stilts with big shoes on or something, big made up feet. So I'm an open-minded person, but I didn't have the opportunity back in the 70s except to have some exposure to the media, and the only thing in the media was, of course, about it being fake. Mm-hmm. But that would change later on for myself as well,
You made an excellent point when you're talking about stilts, because that's the whine of the powerless. It was stilts. The Jerry Crew trackway came down off a mountain, and this is verified by no less than Dr. Ivan Sanderson. Came down off a mountain, 73 degrees. 73 degree slope. I want to see anybody get on a set of stilts and walk down a mountain that is 3 times higher than it is wide.
Yeah, that's when you have to start using your common sense and actually reason that one out.
Mm-hmm. And then you get the people, where's the proof? You can't prove it. I can't prove anything to anybody. All I can do is offer evidence.
It's up to them to really digest that and make their own opinion about it.
That's why we have 12 jurors on a jury.
Yep.
Because everybody requires a different level of evidence to constitute proof. Mm-hmm. And it's to say you need proof. No, you don't need proof. You need to get your tail off the internet, off of YouTube, and get out in the woods and find these people. Or better yet, sit your tail down and let them find you.
Right. Well, we're going to go ahead and take a station break here. When we come back, we're going to delve into a little bit later about some of the more, we talked about the earlier years. We want to kind of get into where it's led you and the contact you've made and some of the things that we shared the same experiences, or some of the things since we've had contact with ourselves in the last 5 years. So when we'll be back, this is Greenwater Nightz with your host Sam Ritchie, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Greenwater Nightz. I'm your host Sam Ritchie, and we're sitting here with our guest Thom Cantrall, and we're getting back into what we were talking about. Thom, we talked about basically the first 20 years, right?
That's pretty close. Yeah.
Okay.
30 years. Yeah.
So we're automatically going probably into the late 70s.
This is mid 70s that we've gotten to so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the same thing happened for many years during that period. I was doing forestry work and I had a logging company, so I was in the woods all the time. And then on my spare time, I would hike and go fishing and go hunting. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So you had an affinity for being out in the woods and all the time, and you're not really a city dweller anyway by any means.
No, it started when I was about the time I was old enough that my diaper didn't drag the ground. I was outside. That was it.
Nice. Yep. Well, hang on one second here. I'm going to grab something so I can keep track of our time. And, and let the audience know this is the first episode of Greenwater Nightz. So, and it's also my first stint as a talk show host. Go ahead.
You're doing very well at it. I've been interviewed by professionals that didn't do as well.
Well, and like yourself, I've been a guest on a lot of shows, and I think my frustration in some respects might be I have a whole lot of information, but you can't control the questions they ask, and they don't necessarily get to all the information you like to talk about.
That's very true. When you find a good interviewer, keep them.
Yes, and hence the reason this progression of starting Greenwater Nightz was to be able to tell the whole story. And the guests are people that probably had interactions with. We're trying to get a clear picture about what's going on. And I found this project to be the thing that needed to do. So anyway, let's talk about, let's go on into, you're in the forest, you've still been involved in logging for a long time.
I have. All through the 70s. I sold my company in the end of that decade to my partner, and actually I just moved kind of sideways and took a job as actually it was supposed to be a road construction supervisor, and it turned out that the company wasn't building as much road as they thought they were going to, and they asked me to take over the cutting crew to run that, and that was a terrible job. All I did was keep qualified people from working, because every time I showed up where the timber was being cut, they wanted to stop and talk. The boss is here, so I was just interrupting them, costing them money, since they got paid by the board foot. They if that saw wasn't running, they weren't making money.
Right.
And and not only that, but it was in the redwood country in Northern California, and my heavens, those people knew more. They'd forgotten more about following those trees than I ever knew, and so I wasn't going to help them any. So, but it was a great opportunity to have more experiences, because I spent a lot of time walking the timber before it was cut, and walking our logging units, and really wishing that I could find a clan that would welcome me in as a member, just stay there. I was kind of disgusted with life and living and the probabilities of the future at that point, and I thought that would be a great way out. Unfortunately, it never happened, but maybe sometime yet.
Oh, you mean the world doesn't give you that optimistic hope about wanting to be part of it anymore?
Oh, my heavens.
Join the club.
There's a man that I respect greatly, and my memory is so bad, I'm trying to remember his name now. He's a economist, Dr. Milton Friedman. He said, if you put our government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there'd be a worldwide shortage of sand.
Oh, I've heard that before. Yes.
And it is so true. Everything they do is bound by special interest groups.
Yes.
Our Navy pays $27 a gallon for diesel fuel that I can buy for $3.39 down here, downtown, paying the tax on it too.
Or back in, I remember we were talking about, what was the story? It just went out about the Pentagon spending like $1,000 screwdrivers or $100,000 toilets or whatever the case may be.
Right.
You know, people started catching on the fact that, I think our tax dollars are not exactly being spent like they should,
Yeah. Well, Judd Hirsch had a good answer for that one on Independence Day.
Refresh my memory on that. I'm trying to think of that incident. I love the movie, but I'm trying to think what you're referring to.
Oh, well, the president had just found out they had an alien at Area 51 in Nevada, and he said, how did they fund that? And Judd Hirsch, who played his father, said, well, you don't think they actually spent $500 for a screwdriver, do you?
Right. And right before you mentioned that, this is exactly what I was thinking about or alluding to, was where's the money going?
Where's
and of course,
the money going?
A favorite topic, of course, is about black projects and everything, but that's a subject for another day.
Right.
We're kind of talking about our experiences here with our favorite friends out in the forest.
Actually, it does play into it, because even though I have been following these people for 61 years now, the last thing I ever want them to have happen is to have them proven to government, proven to science, because I really believe, for the reasons that we've just kind of made light of, that would be the beginning of their demise. Our government does not have a good track record with indigenous people.
Right.
Special interests control Congress. What they want goes. We live in the Pacific Northwest. Our communities have been decimated by a bird that weighs about 1.5 pounds, called the spotted owl. Mm-hmm. Okay? And it's ridiculous, because as a forester, I was in those lands. I saw the spotted owl in old growth timber. I saw the spotted owl in second growth timber. If there was room for him to fly and he could see the forest floor, he was there. Sierra Club told Congress that they only exist in old growth forest, so we have to stop cutting old growth timber. Mm-hmm. Wildlife managers told Congress he exists wherever he can fly. Sierra Club donates billions of dollars to congressmen's re-election funds. Foresters and wildlife managers donate zero to election funds. Mm-hmm. Who do they vote with?
Right.
The professionals, the ones there, the feet on the ground, the ones that knew? No.
No.
They voted with the money. You got to remember, a congressman's only job, once he's elected to Congress, is to get reelected.
Right, and that requires money.
That requires tons of money. So Will Rogers back in the 20s said we got the best government money can buy.
That's true. Yes, and
so
it's kind of hard to avoid politics sometimes, the political environment, you know, when you're talking about any subject anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing like you said, is very true about trying to prove that Bigfoot is real. However, I think, honestly, my opinion, or this is my surmised opinion over all this time, is that the government does know they exist. Their job is to make you and me think they don't.
Actually, I don't know of a Forest Service employee that doesn't know that they exist.
They do, and they're told
but
what?
They're told, don't bring it to the office.
Right.
We don't want to have to deal with it.
Yes.
Okay? What civil servant ever wants more work?
Right.
Okay? From the letter carrier that brings your mail to the Pentagon, they all have the same modus operandi.
Mm-hmm.
Do the least amount of work for the most amount of pay possible.
Right.
And if they were proven, then you'd have people flocking. They'd have more work to do, more reports to write, and they don't want that.
Right.
Okay. Not only that, you'd have the Sierra Club, Fun for Animals, you name it, clamoring for closure of all wilderness lands.
Right.
Okay. Why do you think, you look around and you tell me why Weyerhaeuser land is so heavily logged and the government's land isn't? Because they know it's coming where old growth timber will be outlawed to log on anybody's land, their own land, state land, or private land. So the timber companies are getting it off now while they can.
Before it's restricted.
Before it's restricted.
Right.
Once they replant, then they have more time. Okay. Mm-hmm. Second growth, nobody really cares about anymore. Okay. That's why that's happening. Right. Now you put Sasquatch in the middle of that. We've got to protect them. Excuse me, but they don't need protection. We're the ones that need protection.
Right.
Their population is very stable. They control their population, unlike us. They control where they live, unlike us. And they don't have a hierarchy. They don't have a government telling them what they have to do. You mentioned that it's so hard to do anything without discussing politics. That's because politics have moved into every facet of our life now. It's impossible to avoid them.
And hence, as a human being, we're getting to the point where we don't want to be part of the system anymore. We just, because we see how they live out there. And, of course, I'm an experiencer myself, and I've seen them, and I've actually interacted with them, the Bigfoots, and some other beings, and have been able to come to a conclusion that they got a pretty structured life out there. And do not have all the woes and troubles that we have to deal with our lives here as humans. So it's almost being point of envious or jealous of their situation. We don't want to live in this kind of environment right now. I utterly, personally detest it. I find every opportunity to get out in the woods. If I have to go in the city for any length of time, I look forward to the deck and just get in the car and start driving back toward the Cascade Mountains, because I feel at peace there.
That's probably the biggest problem I have, trapped as I am in the environment I'm in.
Right.
Yeah, I can't do that. It's not possible anymore.
Well, it's a limitation. I'm getting up there too, and fortunately, I still have a measure of health and everything. And I understand it's just as we get older, the limitations of our health are going to become more pronounced,
mm-hmm.
with time. And I'm going to face it too. And I'm going to kind of dread the day that I told my daughters, you're going to have to take care of me in my own house in Tacoma when that day comes. But I'm just going to kind of dread the fact that I won't be able to go out in the woods like I used to.
Yeah.
So I don't blame you.
Mm-hmm. But I was sitting here yesterday contemplating that, and a thought came to me. When life starts getting hairy, Just remember our hairy friends, because hairy ain't bad either.
No, that's true.
I had to make a little cartoon out of that one.
Oh, that would have been good. Yeah, I'll have to see that. Well, we're going about 10 minutes away from the end of the show. I know you want to have some information that you want to tell us about the upcoming conference, and we'll get into that. But for the next 5 minutes, think about some of your experiences that you really want to share right now that is important. I mean, you talked about some important things that have to do with the way they live and the way it's impacting us as humans, because honestly, we got to change our way of life, and that's the big message too.
In 2010, September 25th, 2010, I met a very large 9'3" tall Sasquatch who introduced himself as my teacher. One of our first conversations together was, and I'm quoting him directly, "I do not understand humans. They have no respect for where they live. They have no respect for one another. And worst of all, they do not even respect themselves. That has to change." And I hate to say it, but the internet is a big problem, big part of that. It has given voice to idiots. People who, prior to the internet, the only way they could get an audience for their idiocy was to stand on a soapbox in the park. Now they have a built-in medium, a built-in voice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I asked him, what is the problem? What's the main thing we need to solve? He said, for the first time in the history of man, you have the ability to destroy the world without firing a shot. You're destroying the capital predators in the ocean. Sharks are being destroyed for their fins.
Mm-hmm.
The great tunas are in such low supply that it is not known if all fishing stopped they could recover. And those are the stabilizing influence in the oceans. Remember this, only 20% of our oxygen supply comes from land. Those who say, if we cut down the trees, we're going to all die from no oxygen, they have no idea what they're talking about. Unless you pave the land, the grass that grows in where the tree was, the brush that grows there, photosynthesizes in exactly the same way as that tree did.
Mm-hmm.
But you go to the ocean and you take off the major predators there, you destroy the balance in the ocean, you destroy the biome, and you're not producing oxygen, and that's 80% of the oxygen in the world.
And it's part of the life cycle, too. It starts with the ocean, too, when you talk about the food cycle.
Absolutely everything starts with the ocean. That needs to change.
I don't know how you personally feel about it, but one of the things that affects me quite a bit is the Fukushima disaster and the fact that they are now, they don't know what to do with the spent water of the damaged reactors, and they got the cesium. I forgot the exact number, 151 or something like that. I might be wrong.
The radioactive one.
Oh, the very deadly one. Yeah. And so now they're talking about, we're just going to have to release this water into the oceans. Well, you got to ask yourself, that's got to have an impact across the Pacific Ocean. And once you hit the Pacific, this stuff will eventually, because of the cycle, because of the air cycle, because of the water cycle or the food cycle, it'll get through and saturate everything, including us.
You don't have to go that far.
No, probably not.
Okay. How far is it from here to the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in the Tri-Cities?
I know.
And there are tanks of stuff there. They have no idea what it is.
And some of them are leaking, too.
They've got the leaks pretty much under control now.
Yeah.
But there are tanks that was started in 1943 with the Manhattan Project.
Yes.
Okay, and they've been there ever since.
Well, yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I think the problem there is that they have not put a lot of forethought, to, well, sure, we could have nuclear energy. Let's worry about this problem later. About what to do with the spent rods and everything.
Yeah.
And they had a solution, but the solution isn't like forever.
Well, they do have a solution. They just won't fund it.
Oh, I see. It's going to cost them a lot of money.
That's cost.
And as you say, money seems to run the...
Right.
Yeah. Even if it means destroying the planet for the sake of saving a buck.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
we have a couple of representatives over in that area of the world that are fantastic, because every time what they've done, they fund cleanup and the vitrification plant that's supposed to solidify all this stuff so it can be stored safely.
Right.
But about once a year, some congressman comes up with the idea that, he sees all that money going that way. Oh, we've got to stop that. And so these two same congressmen every time are back on the wagon again, and fighting them to keep the funding coming, keep it coming, and it's a continuous job.
Right. Okay.
Because as soon as a congressman sees money, he wants it.
Well, my final thought on this, we got to change. I mean, it's not just a single problem, it's complex, or it's complicated, as people would say. I honestly, would you agree with me that human nature has to change?
It does. There again, we're back to the respect thing.
Yes.
We've got to respect one another. It's okay to disagree. Mm-hmm. You can disagree without being disagreeable.
Right.
Last November at the Sasquatch Symposium, Summit,
yeah,
in Ocean Shores. After it was over, I walked up to Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and Jeff and I have been friends for years. Okay, we disagree on 60% of what one another says, because he's pure science. It's got to fit the book. If it isn't in the book, it's not. And I go more by gut instinct and what my heart tells me. Mm-hmm. And I walked up to him after the conference, stuck my hand out, and I said, "Jeff, we did it again." And we spent the whole weekend disagreeing with one another, and then shake hands and walk away friends.
Right.
He says, "I know." He says, "Isn't that the weirdest thing?" He says, "I'm sitting here listening to your argument." He says, "And it's so profound, so well put together, and so well stated." He said, "I find my head going up and down when I totally disagree with what you're saying."
But that's good. That's being objective. That's being constructive criticism. It's not destructive criticism.
I have never learned anything worth knowing from somebody who agreed with me totally.
Right.
You learn from people who disagree with you, who have a different idea, mm-hmm. but can state that idea in a way that is palatable to listen to. As soon as the voice goes up, reason goes out the window.
Right, the emotions come into play, and then and this is what happens. The unfortunate thing on the internet, for instance, whether you're posting videos on YouTube or Facebook or anything else, of course now they're starting to crack down on that a little bit. Is it's easy for people to troll. Mm-hmm. And to say all sorts of terrible things to you because it's anonymous and they don't see each other. It's not in person. And that's all part of that disrespect. It's like just because you don't think you see something there, you have to say it. Oh no, you're full of it, or it's pareidoia or something like that. I mean, come on.
There are a lot worse than that.
Oh, I'm just being kind. Oh. I mean, we're talking about the obscene language and all that. Yeah. That's part of it. So, and honestly, I got to the point where any of the stuff on social media, I just simply I don't engage the argument. I simply delete the comment. It's not worth me even putting any energy toward it.
The argument is what they want. If you don't argue with them, they wither up and go away. One evening, actually twice, I've been on Chuck Schlab's Oklahoma's Chasing the Beast show. The first time I was on, I had 255 new friend requests, directly from that show on Facebook. I had 8 people attack me like you were talking about, the trolls. Who am I going to spend my time with?
Right. You're not, you're not that you can't change their mind by arguing with them.
No, they're not.
So they're not there to even intelligently argue it.
No, they aren't.
They're just there to carouse and cause trouble.
Make waves.
And you got to realize that. We're kind of coming up to the last couple of minutes and of the show. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the Georgia event, and what's it about, and when's it going to take place, and how they can get contact so they can find out about going to it.
2.5 weeks from now, 4th, 5th, and 6th of October, we will be in Douglasville, Georgia, which is 35 miles from the Atlanta airport, for a conference on Sasquatch. We'll have 3 days of speakers, walks in the woods, even a banquet is going along with that. And every speaker on the dais this weekend is somebody who has had face-to-face contact with Sasquatch. We didn't ask the college professors. We didn't ask the TV personalities. We asked people that know about what they saw and are actively seeking information to share that information with others. We have 13 speakers lined up, and we're anxious to share. You can go to my website, www.ghostsofrubyridge.com/SAS, and all the information is there. The speakers, the times. We even have an auction going on of some beautiful donated goods, including a Native American style drum that's just out of this world. Join us. I think you'll find it well worth your time.
And that's ghost in singular form, right? The ghost of...
Ghost. Ghost
of plural. So www.ghostofruby...
Shades of, images of Ruby Ridge. That was the title of my first book.
Oh, okay.
It was set in the Ruby Ridge country of Idaho.
Okay.
And so it's and everything that went on there, so it's ghosts of what happened there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That was your one of your first books, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was my very first book.
Yeah, and that's the basis of the website. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks a lot, Thom, and for this first episode of Greenwater Nightz. I'm going to have to get used to saying that, and so I hope everybody enjoyed the show. We're looking forward to doing this for our next upcoming episode. We're currently going to be doing it on Saturdays from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If to listen to it right now, it's on greenwaterradio.com as a audio streaming that you can listen to the program. We're also looking at finding some other outlets that are going to carry the program, so we're looking forward to it. You'll be able to catch us broadcast on some archive, but stay tuned, and you can go to greenwaterradio.com to find out about the show, about the shows that we carry over there, and about any updates to this. So take care, and thanks a lot, Thom.
Well, thank you very much. I do want to make one quick correction. That's Pacific Daylight Time.
Daylight time. Okay. I always get messed up with that. I always just say time. So, okay. Thanks a lot, and everyone, take care, and we'll catch you again.